Got it. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to Royal Family Astrology. Yay!
We have to hype ourselves up.
I know it's been a while. We have taken a little break, but now we're back, and so much has happened since the last time we had a recording. And we hope to catch up with all the events that have been happening with the British royal family. Today, we're going to discuss the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. I think she was almost the longest reigning monarch, but not quite in the UK.
She got really
close.
Yeah.
I think we had someone else.
I think no. I think she was the longest reigning monarch.
Is she?
Hey, it's just she didn't beat out. I don't remember which Louis.
Was it
of
King
France.
James or some other king?
No. King Louis of France was
Louis,
the longest reigning monarch ever.
Got it.
So,
Wow.
yeah.
So she didn't beat out Louis, unfortunately, but those are the breaks. She did last a very long time, a 70-year rule.
And she made it to her platinum jubilee. So
she made it to her jubilee.
75 years.
It was worth
she
it.
had her priorities in order. She made it to the party, and then she was like, "Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, but I'm on my way." Right. So we're gonna look at some of those charts, including the chart of her passing, and just see what that says against her natal chart and the charts of her heir Charles and his heir William. And also we'll be looking at her funeral chart just to see if there's anything that we can look at compared against her coronation chart, right? Because now this is the end of her reign. She served as she said she would to her dying day, and that's what she did. So I think she was working up till 2 days before she passed, meeting the most current prime minister. And then 2 days later, she was gone. And so, it's interesting because it's like it's not, I don't miss her. She wasn't my grandma. However, it feels like that fixture in history, that historical figure that's always present. When someone like that dies, you definitely feel the shift, in the force field. In the force, you feel like, oh, Elizabeth's not here anymore. Something's different.
And then, the new prime minister said hi to the new queen, and then a day later was ushering in a new monarchy. I was like, dang, that's a job switch.
That's quite the omen.
It's a lot of volatility in the UK.
Tough times in the UK, but it's tough times around the world. So this is not us, thinking we're better than anybody. Everybody is getting their hits across the globe, okay?
We're all taking our licks right now.
Yes, we are. So on the morning of September 8th, 2022, Buckingham Palace announced that the family members of Queen Elizabeth was rushing to be her side because of a health concern. And then later that afternoon, about 3:10 local time, they announced that the Queen had died of old age. She was 96 years old, and she had celebrated almost 75 years on the throne.
Oh, exactly. At 75 plus, yeah.
Oh, there you go.
No, I thought it was 70.
Girl, Mercury's still coming out of his retrograde.
Sorry. Maybe you're right.
We might be embellishing about how many years. It was definitely a long time. 70 plus, possibly. So, yes. So today we'll take a look at the transits that were happening.
You're right.
At the time of
It's
her passing.
70. Yeah.
70. All right. And so we were trying to give her some extra years.
Yeah.
But so it's only 70. And just to see what's going to be happening next with her heirs. And what's going to happen to the monarchy, because there's a lot of rumblings, especially in the UK, about possibly not having a monarchy any longer.
And I think too, times of transition, we don't fight a war anymore every time someone transitions, but it can be very volatile, and it's a good time for change. I think people see it that way. So
yes,
things can happen.
So we'll see. And that seems to be a theme happening across Europe, right? Because I think one of the Danish queen, is it Queen Marguerite?
Marguerite,
she rescinded the titles of some of her grandchildren, apparently. So there seems to be a thing happening in some of the monarchies in Europe where they're just like, maybe we should cut our losses and trim down these royal trees so we don't upset the populace who's just like, why do we have you?
Yeah, they're like, well, if we trim ourselves, then you can't trim us, right?
Exactly. Like we don't take up that much money.
I don't know. It begs the question though. It's like, why do you get to have a title, but why don't these people? And it's like, if we're getting rid of some of you, we should get rid of all of you, right?
Well, then yeah, it starts making you think like, well, if the whole thing is you're supposed to be special, right, and have this title, but you can just take it away with like a stroke of a pen, then are you special? Are you?
You're just human with a lot of money and access and privilege, which is nice, but I don't think it puts anyone above anybody. But this is questioning centuries of this idea of, right to rule and God's chosen, and does that have a place in modern society, right? Now, there are plenty of people who would love to go back to the good old days where it does.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing that in a lot of political spheres, but there's also resistance against that. So just a disclaimer, we are talking about death in some of the astrology today, and there's definitely some controversy or, some differing opinions amongst the community about whether or not it's ethical to talk about death astrology. Everyone's different. I'm of the opinion that death is a part of life. That's the one promise that we all have. We're all going to die. All three of us, one day you're going to hear the news that we all popped over. That's just what it is. So personally, I don't think it is unethical. I think it's just another thing to study, right?
Yeah.
Everyone is going to have their death chart at some point in time. And we're just looking at signatures about what it's saying. The thing about death charts is that it can happen at any time. We all have multiple opportunities to transition over. It's not a definite, but I think it comes down to choice. And so Elizabeth was like, I'm 96, girl. Maybe this is it. Maybe I don't want to last another couple of years. And that was her choice to make. Okay, so.
And I think if you go back to our prediction video for 2022 for the Royals, where we talked about Queen Elizabeth, we basically kind of all but said it. And that was mostly out of, respect, and like not wanting to cause people undue upset. But like we clearly said that her titles and responsibilities we're going to be passing on. And so like there's ways you can talk about it without like saying you're gonna die.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the old school Chris Rock song. Here's a horoscope for everybody.
You're gonna
Gemini, you're gonna die twice.
Oh my God.
Twice. Taurus, so you're gonna die eating, but you're very comfy.
Yes.
So this is not to be disrespectful or to be glib about death, but just to kind of handle it in a respectful manner and also a very matter-of-fact manner. People die every day, right? And when we get a chart of the passing of someone, then you're starting to see those symbols and traits that might show up in the passing. That's all.
Yeah. And every chart you look at is a death chart. Somebody died.
Somebody said, all right.
That's actually a good way of thinking about it.
For every birthday chart, there is a death day chart, right?
Yes.
So it's not meant to be this horrible thing. It's just literally part of the human existence. So I think it's good to be comfortable with that, or try to be comfortable with that, instead of it always being so. It is spooky season, though.
It is. It is.
So you have a right to be spooked, but I would hope that you're not.
Yeah. So like these are just some of the reasons why modern astrologers maybe don't talk about death as much. And it's like, it is taboo in our society. We don't talk about death hardly at all. And we barely have any death rituals to speak of. It's kind of weird, actually.
Technically we're still in a mass death event, but you wouldn't know, right? Because we're not talking about it anymore. It didn't really happen, did it?
And several of like the major like astrology organizations, they don't like explicitly forbid it, but they heavily discourage it. So I think they're mostly afraid of harming a client who's vulnerable or in a vulnerable state. So yeah, it's also hard. That's like number 3. I'm like, well, why don't more astrologers do death predictions? And I'm like, have you looked at the techniques for death predictions anytime soon? It's wild, and it is very complicated, and it requires you to know, you better be really sure that you have the correct time, because it's a lot based on ascendants and lots and all kinds of stuff. So it's not an easy technique.
Right. And they're like, if you're versed in multiple traditions, there's so many like points and
Sure.
planets to consider. You know what I mean? It's like Kelli was saying, you really want to know your stuff. And I know some people go by the rule of threes when predicting anything. If it's not showing up in 3 techniques, don't even bother like concluding anything. Don't bother.
However, like I said earlier, I do think there is potential when working with these charts. Like say, for example, you have a client that might be chronically ill and really trying to figure out how to plan or help their family prepare for their passing, so it's not chaotic or unexpected or anything like that. So if you are an astrologer doing that kind of work, it could probably help a lot of people. Be like, hey, you know, we're getting ready. We know it's going to happen. What can we do? When is the time? It's a time frame, looking at how much time do we have together? You know, we want to get our affairs together or have some final hours or days or months together as a family or whatever the case might be, right? So in times like that, it can be really helpful.
And of course, horary astrology will often deal with that as well. But you have to be the person or the person affected to ask the question. So.
Okay. And also modern medicine has made impacts, right? You know, things that used to be a definite death sentence 50, 60, 100 years ago isn't anymore. So that can also add to the complicating factors of predicting death, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you get very close, maybe you get very sick, all sorts of things, but maybe you don't quite cross over. And of course, I believe that every soul has free will, right? So you might just decide, you know, this is my time, I want to exit.
Yeah. So, yeah. And then I just wanted to bring up that, like, you know, not everyone agrees on the techniques to use. Like ancient astrologers focus more on Saturn. And actually, they didn't write down a lot of the techniques. They passed them on through an oral tradition. And so those are completely lost to us. So it can be kind of tricky. Whereas modern astrologers, we maybe tend to bring in Pluto a bit more. Also like transits to the 8th house. And just a reminder that Pluto's moving faster now than in the past. So we will all have more challenging Pluto squares.
How much fun is that?
Easy, like earlier than they used to have. And our anticipated lifespans are longer. So there's a lot going on with all that.
Got it. And who knows, let us know in the comments if you want us to go do some deeper delving into death charts and techniques and things like that, because that could potentially be interesting. To look at death charts of famous figures in the past and, you know, what was going on the day that they crossed over.
And yeah, so today you'll see us using like ancient and modern. So we'll look at Saturn, but we'll also look at Pluto, and we'll also look at the 8th house, and we'll also look at transits to them. And I think the interesting thing, especially with the royal family, is we can look at family charts and then compare them, because there's such a clear like family part, but there's also a business part. The family is the business. And so you can see like, oh, here's someone taking over, like much more clearly than you might in other family charts. So that's useful.
For sure.
But yeah, here's your warning. Don't add us. Don't be looking at it and be like, oh, but my Saturn is opposing mine.
Yeah, no, you know, it's always best to reach out to professionals who do this work when doing prediction work. And if you're going to be practicing prediction work, you know, always do it with a grain of salt. Do not go about predicting your own passing or those of your loved ones, because you just, again, be careful. Do not ask questions you do not want the answers to.
As a horary practitioner, I can tell you it's never good.
Exactly. Okay. So,
and also, yeah. And Queen Elizabeth was 96. Okay. Like that's a different transit than somebody having the same exact transit, but they're 21.
Right. You know? And then on top of that, like, I hope that in this session, like, it's like more so like useful to frame like how this event is affecting like people who are going to inherit things from her, because the 8th house is equally about inheritance and lineage as it is death. So I think that that's kind of going to come across like very strongly in the charts that we end up looking at today.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anything else before we get started on some charts?
Hopefully this is like bigger for y'all to look at.
Yeah.
We'll try. We'll try.
So let us know if this looks better than having it inside of the
presentation
presentation. Yes. Okay, so right now we're looking at the natal chart of Queen Elizabeth. Remember, she's born April 22nd, 1926 at 2:40 a.m. in London, England. And then we're going to look at the chart of her passing, which was listed as September 8th, 2022 at 3:10 p.m. Balmoral Castle, Scotland. Okay.
And we'll do a little disclaimer. That's the official time that they released, and that's what we're going to be looking at. Yes. But of course, like, it's possible she passed earlier, but we're not going to worry about that.
We can only go by what they give us.
Yeah.
One of the things I noticed right away is that there's a lot of freedom Jupiterian elements to this chart, which often shows up quite a bit around people who've crossed over, is Jupiter. And the idea that, you know, you're on to the next adventure. Whatever happens once we leave this physical body, Jupiter is like, and I'm here to deliver you to the next plane, the next reality, wherever we're going next. Okay, so right off the bat, we can see there's a Sagittarius rising in this chart. And Jupiter is in the 5th house in Aries. So I wonder if the angel of death was like, Liz, you're going to have so much fun when you come with me. And she was like, absolutely.
Sign me up.
Me up. And then Jupiter's like, and I'm in the sign of Aries. Aries is ruled by Mars in Gemini, and automatically I think of her late husband Philip, who was the Gemini. So a lot of conversations about her being reunited with Philip, I do think holds some truth to it with this chart.
You can almost like imagine like Philip kind of being there and being like, are you ready to go? Because I'm about to cut it.
I know, right?
And his little like Joker self, you know, kind of like just playing it off, like, yeah.
So Mars can act like a severing tool, right? It's sharp objects. So you can imagine Mars kind of cutting the silver cord that connects us to our bodies in a way, and saying, all right, that's it, cut, and time to go. And it's right on the ascendant-descendant line. Oftentimes we do see the descendant when it comes, descendant being active in death charts, just because the descendant is sunset, right? This is where the light is fading and we're going into the underworld beneath the horizon. Okay, so.
Yeah, I did want to point out that if you look at the chart, I see the Jupiter Mercury opposition, and you see like there are elements of like the body and like the self being opposed to, you know, the role that you have in society, just because Mercury does rule that 10th house. And what's interesting is that Mercury was about to station retrograde like the next day. And what's interesting is that Mercury is ruling that Mars on the descendant, which also rules the 12th house of like, you know, like the 12th house can be a house of endings and like death and loss, right? And so what's interesting is that because Mercury was about to station retrograde, it kind of couldn't like, it never like fully connected with Mars fully. And so the way I see it, when a planet is supposed to make like contact with its ruler, but it never perfects, it's like a near miss. And so I'm wondering if maybe there was an opportunity to like have discussions about like a proper transition of power or handover to the children, you know, seeing that the chart ruler is in the 5th, but that never got to happen because of the passing.
Like it was too quick, like they maybe started to have those discussions and then we're like,
and they couldn't complete. Yeah.
No, that's a good call.
It seems like things happen pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Just based upon the configuration alone of these planets, it's Mercury opposite Jupiter, and then Jupiter sextile to Mars, and Mars trying to Mercury. So this was speedy stuff. And I think we saw that the day of was like there was a lot of movement trying to rush up to the castle, trying to get to her in time before she passed, it seemed like, but it doesn't seem as though they did.
Most everyone made it, yeah.
Yeah, it seemed like this was a very quick situation.
And the mutable angles, I think also speaks to that of like, I don't think this was yet prepared for, and it was kind of like, oh, surprising.
Yeah.
And then you see the Venus at the top of the chart, because I think in a real sense, like the UK sort of lost its like mother figure a little bit in that. And you got like that struggling Venus, and it's kind of like, okay, but she can't do that anymore. She can't fulfill that role. You know, and she's gonna leave.
Yeah, so Venus, and all this Venus is also an applying square to Mars too. So it's just like, again, cutting of the active service. You know, that was her whole kind of image, you know, her commitment to duty, and she's all about service and doing her role, and and so that was coming to an end. I think also this moon Saturn too, in Aquarius in the chart, is probably also talking about, you know, the ending of that role for her. Moon in Aquarius, kind of the mother to the people to an extent.
And Saturn, the god of death, coming for you. And being like, your labors are over, you know. Yeah.
And I think we're seeing again the speed again with Uranus being square to that moon too.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
So again, a lot of quick, I just gained the notion that this was a very quick situation, which is, I think would make sense, because she was literally doing work 2 days before she passed when she was meeting the prime minister. And although she looked very small and frail, I didn't think it'd be that fast.
No, she was upright. She was upright.
Like, she was talking and smiling. She did have a bruise on her hand that was noticeable, but other than that, she looked pretty cheery. So I do think this was a fast death.
And this is a void moon?
I think so.
Yeah, it's void.
So the last aspect would have been to
Saturn, and then there's no new that I see. So I think that like speaks again to like maybe just people not being aware that was going to happen. You know, everyone was like, what?
And then also the doubling of she's done her duty. This is finished. Yeah. All right. Anything else about this chart?
No, I think we should look at the overlay, because I think that's where the
BiWheel
potatoes is. Yeah.
So let's look at her natal chart on the inside wheel, and on the outside is her death chart.
And I think
So
the first thing that stands out to me is she was in a first house Saturn perfection, right? And she's a night chart. So Saturn is kind of intense. So Saturn conjoined her Mars the day that she passed, and the moon was going over this as well. So that to me was quite loud, because I wasn't thinking about it at the time. I was like, wow, she just kind of like went. I thought she would be here longer personally, but I mean, for the fact that Mars was in her 6th, I mean, it kind of was pointing to like increased health pressures. Mars does rule her midheaven in the 11th house. So again, Saturn's bringing an end to her role in her public life. That could mean a lot of things, guys, but like, you know, when I was thinking about this transit for her, I would probably have said, okay, best case scenario, she like resigns, right? And she steps down from her position. But you know, her service was ending, and this was just a literal manifestation of that. On top of that, you'll see that Mars, even though it hasn't perfected yet, while transiting her 6th, is squaring the ruler of her 10th sign house, which is that Venus Pisces.
Right.
So
here's the Mars, and it's square to the Venus.
Yeah. So again, speaking to maybe like a health related challenge, you know, literally like taking her away from her role. But then remember that Venus rules the fifth whole sign house, which is to do with children. So, by being forced out of this role because of health challenges, maybe putting pressure on the children to step up and take more authority. And that was quite literal. Yeah.
Sure. So also the ruler of the sixth being her natal Mercury, since her sixth house cusp is in Gemini. And on that day, Jupiter was not exactly on her Mercury, but coming pretty close, coming backwards.
Yeah.
So Jupiter may have inflamed or exacerbated an existing health issue. And then what else?
And with the Mars in Gemini in the sixth, it was already inflamed. There was either infection, a fever, something that was either some vascular problem too, maybe, that was already an issue. And the Jupiter didn't help.
For sure. And then transiting Mercury was also opposite to her natal Mercury as well. So, there's definitely something, maybe this was an external situation, maybe this was an infection, like you said, maybe something airborne because it is in Libra. We know that she was meeting with people 2 days beforehand. So that's also a possibility. Yeah.
I mean, Mercury was also stationing in her 10th, like on her lot of fortune, which is the lot that does have a lot of bodily connotations. So I find that a little bit loud, at least. Yeah. And then finally the moon, which even though it's like not ruling her 8th house, it is in the 8th house natally. So it does have some ties to, maybe end of life stuff. The moon being on her 12th house ruler Jupiter as well, like just something about, I think of the fact that the moon has to do with like contracts because it rules the 7th, right? And maybe covenants you make. And again, Jupiter, the planet of liberation, also ruling the 12th house, which kind of like dissolves things and like takes things out of the public eye or visibility. I think it's like literally the dissolving of a contract because now she just doesn't have the ability to fulfill that contract anymore. So it's like she's liberated from it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, also the moon in her natal is the ruler of the 7th. So again, the 7th, the 8th and the 7th can have those, the sun or the planets are falling at this point into the underworld. So I think we're starting to see that overlaying pattern of just like the underworld's coming to her, saying, "We've come for you. Come this way."
Yeah, it's funny too because it's like Jupiter's moving like backwards. It's almost like coming back for another. I wonder if like, the health issue that she had before was exacerbated. Yeah.
I'd be very curious if we look another time, we'll look at when Jupiter maybe came to her Mercury the first time to see if there were health issues in the news, or maybe that's around the time that Harry was like, "What are you doing with my grandmother?" Like, let me over there to see what you're doing. Yeah.
Oh, guys, before we like look at other charts, I see that the sun is just separated from the opposition to her 10th whole sign house ruler, that Venus, and the sun rules the 8th house.
Yeah.
Yep. That will
so transiting Sun and Mars were completing that T-square with her Venus. And so again, this sort of like challenge applying pressure.
Yeah. So the ruler of the house of death came across the table to Venus, the ruler of her image, public image. Okay, so you're going to have a transition in your image. You're no longer going to be living. You're going to switch. You're going to change your role in the world to someone who's living, to someone who's deceased. Sometimes it's literally that literal.
Yeah, also guys, remember Mars rules the 4th whole sign house, and the 4th house historically could literally mean like going under the earth, like quite literally. So there's that too.
So what are the houses we typically see in death? Wait, 12th house, 8th house, 4th house, roughly?
And then if you do play with Vedic a bit, too, the ruler of the 2nd and the 7th houses are said to be the killing planets. So 2 and 7 can also be relevant. Yeah, it just really depends on a lot, you know?
Yeah. That's why it's so complicated. But yeah, like especially too, like challenging transits to the ruler of the ascendant, like because that's your literal body, can also. And so here we have Saturn, you know, the ruler of her ascendant being.
Didn't Pluto station like not too long? I think Pluto stationed direct, or has it yet? I don't know if it has, but Pluto is slowing down in her first too, which doesn't help.
Right, going over her ascendant.
Pluto turns direct on the 8th of this month. So yeah.
Okay.
So there was a lot of stress on her Saturn, and we saw this at the beginning of the year, right? When we did the predictions, we knew that her Saturn was going to be hit by Uranus. We knew that her Saturn was going to be hit by Saturn out in the sky. So that alone, plus her age, plus her health issues, was already kind of telling us that there would be enough resistance to life this year. So yeah. So this is not surprising.
Yeah.
Not really.
Don't sleep on, you know, the ascendant being your actual literal body.
And Pluto being there can't have been easy on her. I'm very curious if her health started to decline when Pluto went into Capricorn. And that was years ago. 2008, 2009, someplace in there.
Somewhere in there, yeah.
So I really do wonder if that was the case. Okay, anything else about Lizzie's chart?
I think we covered it.
All right, let's move on to Charles. Charles.
And like that's kind of like what we were talking about, that like in this family, you can look at the other members of the family and see them losing status, gaining status, and all that kind of stuff, you know, and that helps you when you're trying to predict what might happen.
Because obviously the life and death of someone else has an impact on the people around them, right? It's not just they don't just die, right? They do.
Isolation, yeah.
It's not just an isolation. Their death has rippling effects on the people around them, right? It changes their life too. Okay, so
here's the natal, in case you forgot. He's a Pluto rising.
Third. My God. Right. So let's look at
just the name alone. If anyone is familiar with Charles I and Charles II, you'd be like, interesting choice.
I mean, historically, those are not the most
those are not the most successful kings.
Or luckiest of kings.
The first one got his head chopped off. So there's that.
Didn't the second one run up a bunch of debt?
The second one ran up a bunch of debt and was a dissolute, right? And like drunkard, but he did have cute dogs, so we'll give him that.
Okay. So here comes Charles. Maybe he thinks third time's the charm. Maybe he's like, you know what, the other Charleses, they just didn't get it, but I'm the great Charles.
I'm the good Charles.
I'm the good Charles. I'm the Charles that people have been waiting for. Now, is this true? I don't know. So far Charles's reign has been a little bit cranky.
Got off to a rocky start, not gonna lie.
A little bit of a rocky start. So let's look at how his mother's passing has impacted his chart. So the loudest thing that we saw, I think,
that we were screaming in the group chat on the day of. We're like, what?
Oh my goodness, the literal passing over. Venus came to Charles's Saturn and said, here you go, kid. You want this role so bad? And Venus being the ruler of his whole sign 10th, right? So all of his ambitions and dreams of being king, Venus literally came and said, here it is. There it is.
Yeah. It concretized that goal. I mean, with Venus being in her fall, I mean, it comes under difficult circumstances. It's worth noting that Venus also rules the degree of his IC. So it does say things about parents and, the loss of mother. I also think about the fact that Saturn rules the whole sign 6th and 7th. And that to me just says a lot about, like, again, taking on a covenant of service. And so literally it's like, through the passing of my parents, I am now in charge of like being a public servant. And maybe that's having implications for how people respond to him receiving such a title. I also think it's interesting that, so I think he's in the Virgo perfection year right now.
Right.
And Saturn is in that house. So Saturn is super active. so Saturn is in the 7th, squaring his chart ruler. Saturn is conjoined the moon as well, which also rules the 12th house. And the moon does say things about mother as well. So it's like, again, this loss of mother handing over this like role to him is very loud.
Yeah. And it's like everything you've ever wanted, but under some really like difficult circumstances. Challenging, like those squares, and it's like, oh man, it's like the whole thing you've waited for your whole life, and yet it comes at one of the worst possible times for you.
But probably feeling like it was always going to be that way, right? Because his mother did say that she was going to rule to her dying day. So from the beginning, it was set up to be a painful transition.
Yeah.
Had she stepped down years ago, maybe it wouldn't be so hard right now. But it's just like, all right, so she steps down, she dies, and now all this is happening at once. Which I guess is traditional, but maybe that's why the transition periods have always been so rocky. Like people are not in their right mind, like they're grief struck, like they're just a mess. Maybe this is not the best time to be transitioning major roles of power and influence.
It's not a good setup.
No, people are hurt and they're in their feelings, and they're probably thinking of old grievances. Those things can kind of fuel a lot of bad decision makings. You know how funerals are sometimes with family. It's not always clean. The other thing that showed up was that the nodes are at 16 degrees of Scorpio and Taurus, and that's exactly where his natal Pluto is. So you're definitely feeling this kind of fatedness in terms of, meeting your destiny. And when a planet comes to be in the middle of the nodes, it's usually at a crossroad point where you're kind of deciding which way to go with the planet. And so Charles has to decide, how is he going to use his royal power, right? Pluto and Leo. How is he going to reign as sovereign if he's able to? And we shall see. This is big. All the choices, if it feels like the choices that he's making are important, it's because they are. And I feel like he's laying the groundwork for his reign, for better or for worse. So I hope he's cognizant of that.
Yeah, like every decision is infused with like destiny almost. Like, who?
Another thing that's interesting to me is that even though the sun, which is his chart ruler, is a bit far off, it's like squaring that Mars in his 5th. And I think about how he passed the titles to William short after. And Mars does rule his MC, but also his 4th house. And so again, tying in the like loss of mother, but also like, passing on important like rites of passage to, your children. I think
so. You said Mars opposite Jupiter?
Well, Mars opposite Mars is some of that, but I was saying more so the transiting sun squaring that Mars.
Got it. Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So the sun being the rule of the first, in the 2nd, giving assets over to the sun in the 5th.
Yeah.
Right. Got it.
Yeah. It's almost like handing out largesse, isn't it? Like, oh, here you go. To my children.
And then also the 4th house and the 9th house, you said, Mo, being ruled by Mars.
Yeah,
so
but also the
titles,
midheaven specifically.
So the midheaven, the 4th house, so titles, land, property, all of that too is being pushed over to the children, or at least one of the children.
At least one.
At least one of the children. The 2nd child is not getting a lot of love right now, but who knows? The total side note, but I'm just thinking about if Harry is the 2nd son, I think he'd be represented by the 7th house cusp as Saturn. And Saturn in his chart is in the 2nd with Venus. And who was getting all the attention over this funeral? With the 2nd son. For his uniform, for his military service.
Oh yeah, military,
so literal sometimes.
Okay. And we have to talk a little bit about that Saturn moon conjunction, because that is the other too, how the 7th house, and the moon is the people, and that is not a cozy, warmly disposed moon towards Charles.
So
I mean, look, I will say the moon, though, the moon is in its own decan, right?
That's
and
true.
That last decan of Aquarius is very much like, what are the essentials, right? And I think that, you know, the moon is operative here to some extent. So like, I don't think the people are like over the moon about Charles.
Get it? Over the moon.
They're not over the moon about him, but I do think that there was like a deference for, you know, the duty that we had to take on, this, that, and the third. But I can't help but wonder if like that does represent people like kind of questioning like what the status of monarchy is.
What are you going to do for us, right? Isn't that like the last decan of Aquarius is like show me the money, right?
like what, like if it's not going to get the essentials met, there needs to be the option to pick up and go somewhere else where you can get those met. So I think it's like a, yes, there's this tentative contract that you are taking on, but like if it's not serving its essential function, I think people are going to question it. However, I do wonder if like this is also the beginning of people maybe being supportive of a slimmed monarchy while also maybe being open to the ending of it, right?
Yeah. And they're waiting to see like which argument maybe they're more predisposed to.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if some of that mundane astrology can also apply here, since the moon is void conjunct Saturn, like and that idea that nothing will come of this. So will nothing come of this transition of power? I mean, maybe that will be more decisive if we get a coronation chart for Charles at some point in time.
Right.
But if this is a chart that's talking about the future power dynamics, he may not have as much power as he hopes to have.
Maybe he doesn't have the juice to get it done.
Maybe there's like, a lot more blockages with Saturn being so tight to that moon. This chart, I mean, does it have a lot to give to a new monarch? I mean, the moon, the sun in Virgo, the Venus in Virgo.
No, there's not a lot of benefic energy here, but
it's not a ton. But again, we'll have to see with the coronation chart if there is one.
That might be, a little bit.
For some reason, I keep saying if. I'm like, I don't know why I keep saying if.
What do you know that we don't know, Janelle?
I don't know. if we get a coronation chart, if. I don't know. Things are more wild these days, so anything can happen.
Well, that's true.
Anything can happen. Anything else about Charles's charts that we want to discuss?
No, we should look at the next heir to the throne, to be honest.
Let's take a look at William. So we got William's natal.
And boy, did they pick up on those titles right away, baby.
It was.
Her body was not cold, honey.
Her body was still tepid, like it was still warm to the touch when they were like, actually, it's the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall. Actually, no. It's the Prince and Princess of Wales.
Rebrand.
They did not let the ink dry on either of those titles when they were switching them over. I was just like, well, that's interesting.
Wild
it protocol?
Man, I don't know. Can you imagine if Harry and Meghan had done that?
Imagine.
Oh God, the people would riot.
Yes. So we'll have to talk about that next time, maybe their reception and the things that happened with those two. But talking about William, right? June 21st, 1982, 9:03 p.m. in London, UK. Cancer sun and moon, Sag rising. What's going on with him? With his grandma's passing. So right away we noticed that there was a double whammy Mars-Mercury situation happening in William's chart that day. So
yes, and Mars is his time lord. So wait, let's see. Mars is his time lord. Oh, from the luminaries and the ascendant. Mars is loud for him.
So William just turned 40 in June, right?
Yep.
40 is a fifth house year. he has Aries on the cusp of his 5th house, so Mars is his Lord of the year. So
but also, if you perfect from the sun and the moon, it's 5 signs away too, right? So it's like triple Mars. It's just Mars, right? Like Mars is like, hello.
That's a lot of Mars,
right?
Wow.
Yeah.
So much Mars.
So, so far we've heard from Prince William this year, as we predicted earlier, some of his sexual proclivities have been making the press lately, which can be 5th house. So the Prince of Pegging did trend at some point, I think last month, and just rumors about his sex life have been in the news. There's been promoted ads about his children and him being a good father. It's really kind of odd, but this is the Mars energy in his chart showing up.
Yeah, the children have also been out more.
Like
I've noticed they've been doing more public engagements and things like that. So
they brought the kids to the funeral, or at least Charlotte and George. People were kind of, I don't know if they were up in arms, but it was a little bit weird, and only because there was a little bit of tense press around them before they brought the kids out. So it kind of felt like they were using the kids as kind of a press buffer, which can be a little bit dangerous because the press could definitely turn on them very quickly, which I think we're already seeing.
Yeah. What's interesting about William's chart, though, when it comes to the death, I think of the fact that transiting Jupiter is opposite his natal Mars, which again points to like this change in like, I guess like his authority as well, because Mars does rule his midheaven. So it's like this change in title that's kind of hinted at. Transiting Mars is also let's see. Well, transiting Mars trining his natal Mars also feels kind of loud for that as well. And I noticed the first couple of days it was like kind of ambiguous about what his title would be, because again, first they were the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall, which I think they still technically are.
Yes,
it was like, okay, will he get the Wales title or not? And like it was weird how like they kept like changing their profile and stuff. So I felt like that was kind of loud. And then for the fact that again Mercury is like stationing to a trine with his natal Mercury, but also on his natal Mars, speaks to again the change in titles as well.
Because Mercury's being the ruler of his whole sign 10th house. So we all see these changes in his title or his position, his role in the world through these aspects.
If you do derived houses from the 4th, so like the 7th house is like the parent of your parents. So like grandparents can be a 7th house topic. And if you want to go trad, 4th house is dad, right? Dad's parent is like, you see where I'm going with this? Like just paternal grandparents like passing and that.
Well, no matter how you turn the chart, the theme
it's loud,
echoing.
Yeah, it's loud, guys.
Okay. Anything else about William's chart? I mean, even the Sun and Venus being in his 10th, I think just by them being in that house, he's ascending in some ways, but it doesn't feel like it's, how can I describe it? It doesn't feel as shiny as it should in some ways.
Well, yeah, that's that Venus and Virgo.
Like it feels like, okay, here are these titles, here are these new roles, and now an additional amount of work is going to be placed on you, right?
Yes, and look at that Venus in a really partile sextile with the moon, which is the 8th house ruler. So 11th house can describe like wealth earned from your titles, and so he earned a shit ton of money because now he's the Prince of Wales. But like again, as Janelle and Kelli wonderfully pointed out, like Venus also rules the 6th. So like again, there's a lot of work that comes with being in charge of like money. So does he get access to the Duchy of Cornwall now?
Yes.
Or
yes.
Okay.
Well, I'm very curious.
Cash. That's a big duchy.
Well, look at this. Often, I think we've discussed before that we see Pluto Venus or Jupiter Venus, but large sums of money in a chart, and we definitely see Pluto trine to his Venus, right? So maybe that's talking about the upgrade in income and finances. But we also see Saturn, when it turns forward again, it's going to be squaring this Venus too. So although there's an increase, it's definitely not going to be easy. And also he's also having that Pluto square too, generation wise, but I'm assuming it's going to play a part in this too. There's going to be some tension around this increase of money for him.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the
So,
responsibility it comes with.
Yeah. It's not like I think he's going to realize, I think maybe he thinks like, oh, I have a lot of money now. And then he's going to get like all the bills and everything that he has to pay and all the strings that come attached. And he's going to be like, oh, it's not free money.
I would definitely warn him to not get into debt or to gamble. And I feel like I've spoken about this with him before, that I think he might have a tendency towards that, especially with Jupiter going through his 5th and squaring to his sun and moon in the 8th.
Right.
I mean, the 5th house is also speculation. And you
And
see
games.
the 5th house
Games of
ruler
chance.
is in the 11th, right? And you see how he has that natal Saturn-Mars conjunction in the 11th? It's almost like, you know, that's a really privileged Saturn, especially because he's a day chart, right? And so he's technically a day chart, even though he was born at night, right? So it's almost like leveraging these sorts of connections you get, which, you know, gives you that like wealth and earning potential, and then maybe like making risky investments and like risky projects and risky organizations maybe. So there might need to be more care around that.
Because remember, Jupiter and Aries can be a little bit impulsive and quick to jump into something. So this can be definitely, what does it say in the books? Like fall in love quickly, or like fall in love fast but repent in leisure. Like like remorse in leisure. Like you're like, ooh.
Yeah, it's something about like fall in love in haste, repent in leisure, something like that. Yeah.
So that could be the same case with his lovers or any kind of affairs that he might get up to, because that has been something that's been circulating around him for quite some time. So there might be
any
stuff around
partnership,
that.
business, any of that.
Yeah. So.
And also, don't forget that 3rd house with brothers, and that's where the Moon Saturn conjunction is.
Oh, William. Let it go, William.
Yeah, so like that's definitely like giving like a sort of unhealthy obsession with siblings, and like definitely wanting more than you're going to get out of it.
Yeah, I am curious. I mean, I think the issues with Harry are probably going to continue for a while longer, most likely. This Saturn's going to move off into the 4th house eventually, and also it's going to square his natal Mercury, which can also be representation for the brother too. So I just think things are going to continue to be a little bit tough between them for a while. But we'll see. We'll see. Anything else?
I think we got it.
I think we're good.
I am curious what's going to happen when Jupiter is opposing to Saturn. I wonder if maybe that's when Harry releases the book. No, I don't think so. No, that wouldn't be it. But something's going to happen with younger brother that's going to inflame some stuff, I think.
Yeah.
All right.
It is interesting that because of Queen Elizabeth's passing, he did have to cancel that trip to America. So
he is due to come visit us in December. I'm not sure what date that is supposed to be.
Oh, okay.
But we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I mean, that would be funny because it's the ruler of his 9th in the ascendant. So, I mean, yeah, that would make sense. It's, Sag Sun, ruler of the 9th.
But we're still going to be having that Mars situation in the 7th. So
it would be funny if he comes at the Sun Mars opposition. That would be kind of comical.
He may not find himself as well received as he would like, I'm thinking, but we shall see.
I wouldn't suggest many of the royals try to do that during this extended Mars and Gemini transit.
No, they're gonna get a verbal lashing, most likely.
Well, yeah, I also feel like we have bigger fish to fry on a global level.
Yeah, like if you're not helping us figure shit out, you need to step to the side.
Yeah.
Like if you're not helping, you're harming. So please step to the side. Okay. Anything else about William's chart?
I don't think so.
Okay. Let's move on to her funeral chart. So this was, I guess, the official final funeral.
Yeah.
So I think there was 10 days of mourning that they put in, and there was some controversy around that because they said that 10 days of mourning meant that you couldn't go see your doctor for your scheduled visits. So if you were receiving treatments for a chronic illness, those appointments were canceled or rescheduled. And just it seemed like life kind of came to a halt for the majority of the UK as this period of mourning was in session. And I don't think people were too thrilled about it. And I can see why. Like, I get there's a mourning, but that shouldn't stop me from doing what I have to do.
Yeah.
Anyway, so her funeral was for September 19th, 2022 at 11 a.m. in London, UK. Scorpio rising, sun in Virgo, moon in Cancer. I mean,
yeah, it's interesting. Like they're saying goodbye to the queen, and she was a Taurus, and that's in the 7th house.
Sending her off to the underworld.
And sending her bye.
Good day,
Bye.
ma'am. Saturn in the bends of the nodes, Saturn squaring Uranus, Saturn in the 4th. So, the family is grieving. There has been a loss and a severing. Ruler of the chart in the 8th house. So obviously we're here.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you're right.
For death.
Yeah.
We are gathered here for a
gathered here for a death. And I think this is the second funeral. Was it? Was this the second mass or second?
Remember. They had so many. I don't know.
So
I know this was the last final one.
Yeah, there were multiple I guess funerals or wakes or sitting and what did they call it? What do they used to call it when you're standing and sitting in service? Not service. What do they call it? I'm forgetting my vocabulary.
A vigil.
There you go. Or they have the body in state.
Oh, lying in state.
Lying in state. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think she had maybe 2 of those at minimum, which would make sense with the Mars and Gemini having at least 2 formal funerals or wakes for her. Anything else? Anything spectacular about this chart?
I mean, the moon Venus sextile is nice. It is nice. Because again, it speaks to, people from other countries, like on a mundane level, people from other countries coming to pay their respects. So, yeah.
And Leo on the midheaven, right? So celebrating the life of a monarch.
Royalty.
And I mean, look at the sun in the last decan of freaking Virgo. It's like really giving
she
legacy.
Served the people, the community.
Here's her legacy of service. Like that was literal. I mean, the sun's also opposite Neptune. So there's like
so it's just like, so what service? People are asking questions like, what exactly did she do?
What is it? Yeah.
What service?
People were questioning the legacy, but also like I feel like the pomp and circumstance just around burying her as well was pretty loud. So
and I think we saw that in her coronation chart, that there was a dedication to the image, like selling the image of royalty, and because what else could they sell? It's not like the power is what it used to be a generation or 2 ago. So it's like we have to sell the secrecy and the mystery of the royal family. So I do like that Neptune Sun opposition for like the last performance, the last display. If the hologram carriage wasn't enough, hopefully this funeral.
That was kind of like wildly prescient, wasn't it?
Right?
That's kind of weird.
The hologram carriage.
She'll never ride in this carriage again, and she didn't.
She did not.
And here's the show. Here's the show. Everyone wave at the show. Like Do not pay attention to what's going on behind the curtain.
Mm-hmm. It's very Wizard of Oz.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think that Uranus square the nodes too is like interesting for, I think a lot of people were shocked.
Mm-hmm. Saturn and Uranus on the nodes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Saturn coming to the IC, it's like your responsibilities are over.
Yeah. And I think also, like I said earlier, like to have someone like her pass away, or like Desmond Tutu or Nelson Mandela, for our generation that grew up with these people as global figures and like fixtures, when they leave, it does feel very shocking, because it's kind of like they've been there forever. You expect them to be there forever, and then they're not. And so it definitely feels like an ending of a chapter because they're no longer involved. Yeah. So I can see the collective surprise about, oh wow, like, oh
yeah, like I didn't expect this, even though she was old, and you're like, but I just still didn't expect it.
Like, you just think certain people are going to live forever, like they're just going to be there forever because they've always been in your life. And that's definitely something that's been happening a lot in conversation with people. You know, she's been the only queen we've known for 70 odd years. Like, that's what, at least 3 generations
Yeah,
of people who've only known her. So this is a big, I guess, collective psychic change for people to deal with.
Yeah, I also feel like she's like, again, like with the passing of her, but not just that, but also, you know, the last of the World War II vets that were alive, the last of the Holocaust survivors that were alive. I think, like, you know, with that happening and us being, you know, in a world that's probably on the brink of like international conflict, like it's like you have all the people who lived through this like passing. So it's like, you know, especially as, you know, we're in an increasingly polarized world and we're losing those voices who, you know, lived through certain things. Like, we don't have the people to kind of tell us, hey, maybe this isn't a good idea anymore.
Either that or they're choosing to leave because they've seen this before.
Yeah, they're like, oh, we're not doing this shit again. Like, the First World War was more than enough, you know, and that's something that I'm surprised they didn't talk about that more. But, you know, Elizabeth did serve in World War II, even as a princess. So this is the fact that she's crossed over and that's over, and all the Holocaust survivors and all the people who've been a part of that story were repeating that story, especially with Uranus being back in Taurus, right? Because that's where it was the last time we did have World War II, or the lead up to World War II.
Yeah.
Yes.
So.
And the nodes there.
And the nodes there.
I think that underlines that Uranian signature too, of like, pay attention.
Pay attention. Like,
also the Pluto going back and forth between a cardinal and a fixed sign, that was another signature. Last time it was Cancer, Leo.
Cancer, Leo.
Yeah.
Got it. Well, I guess we're on time then.
We're right on time.
Right on time.
Wasn't it great?
Fascism, guys.
Looking great.
War. Great.
Loving it.
All right. Let's take a look at our final chart. And it is the coronation chart of Queen Elizabeth against the chart of her funeral.
Wow, that's the Mars return. Kind of scary.
Oh,
I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that when we were pulling the chart. I didn't realize that.
Look at that Gemini chart. Woo, baby.
So remember that Elizabeth did her coronation on June 2nd, 1953. And so right away, we see that Mars has come back home to his sign that it was when she did seat the throne, right? So in that chart is Jupiter, Sun, Mars, and Mercury all in Gemini. And Mars is right there next to the sun saying, and we're done. Cut.
Yeah, you got the midheaven coming to the ascendant.
Yeah, where the Pluto is. And it's also saying, we are done.
We're done. Wow. Cut. Right. Okay. What else? We have the nodes and the ascendant on the IC. Jesus, you could not make this chart up. There's so many done, cut, finish, descendant to the MC, and the ending is now public. We are finished.
Wow.
Right? Saturn at the angles, all of the angles saying we are finished, done, finished.
Well, no wonder she decided to leave.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look at that.
Yeah.
It's like I did everything I was supposed to. Bye.
What I promised to do.
Right.
And
Exactly.
Mercury, what's Mercury doing in this chart? So when she passed, I think Mars would have been a degree off of her sun.
Yeah.
10 degrees of the
And
coronation
then-
chart.
Yeah, and then the Saturn and the moon and the death chart are opposite Pluto of her coronation chart. So it's all just giving cut and seen and done. Transition of power,
Over, finished.
Oh wow. And then so when she passed, that would have been the lunar return of the coronation chart. So that's kind of
wow, that's another signature. Yeah.
Let's actually pull up that BiWheel real quick. Okay, so this is her coronation chart on the inside, and on the outside is the actual chart of her passing. So as we can see, that Mars was at 10 degrees Gemini, right on top of that sun at 11 degrees of Gemini, right? Severing the cord. The sun and Saturn sitting on the descendant and opposite the Pluto of the coronation chart, right?
Get out of here. You're over.
It's real literal, guys.
It's like coach pulling you off the field and
right?
Like, okay,
like,
your replacement's here.
Hit the lockers.
Oh wow. And then look, so Venus is in a square to that Jupiter, which is the ruler of the eighth. So again,
Venus
it's like
square to Jupiter.
It's passing the torch again under not great circumstances. Because remember, she was inheriting a very public role under similar circumstances, loss of parent. So,
yeah, and like it was a shock for everyone when her father died because he died young,
very young. Yeah, maybe in his 50s, I think it was something like that.
Don't smoke, kids.
I mean, in his defense, he was not expecting to be king, and he did not have the temperament for king, and it was just all that stress just escalated his chronic smoking to a new level, I'm sure. Yeah, so anything else about this chart be like?
No, it's so loud. Like I don't have anything else to say. It's wow.
The end of an era, essentially.
Oh, the MC, the transiting MC meeting Saturn. That's just another one. Oh, you're done.
Yeah. You're done. You're done. How many ways we have to say you're done, kid?
I know. Just like repeats over and over again. It's
and
astonishing.
That's what you're going to see with things like this. It's not just one thing, it's several things. So we found at least 3 to 4 patterns in one chart that is talking about a transition or an ending or stopping of something. And in this case, her life and her legacy of her coronation chart. So,
and that's when you can feel pretty confident in your delineation is when you like are building a case like that, where you see the repeating pattern.
Yeah. So Mars and Saturn, we got some Pluto, what we discussed earlier, tend to pop up. In addition, some Jupiter. So, it is pretty clear that this was her time to go. And, I hope wherever she is, she's good. Wherever she is in spirit, I hope her soul's at peace and we can move on and she feels good about how she contributed or not, up to her. And we carry on with the story going forward. And that's how it goes. Until we meet again, Lizzie.
What weren't people making jokes about Trisha Paytas's baby was born?
Yeah, and she hadn't even given birth yet.
Okay. Oh my God.
I think she gave birth like 2 or 3 days later. Okay. I think her baby actually came on September 11th. So.
Oh wow.
I didn't even know she was pregnant.
I didn't either.
I hope that baby will be okay.
I mean, she named her Malibu Barbie, so I think it'll be fine.
Goals.
Yeah. She named her baby Malibu Barbie. I'm not joking.
I just put some books up there if anyone's interested. These are some that you can look at.
Yes.
You want to learn about length of life, death, all that kind of good stuff. Master of the Nativity. On the astrology podcast, which I still am like, okay, yes, okay.
Astrology, it's just a long learning process. You never feel like you know anything.
Yeah,
always being humbled.
I know, you're always like, wow, I don't know anything. Interesting. And then every time I look at the considerations by Bonatti, and I'm just like, I have not memorized all these yet. I am slacking.
We're all slacking by that definition. Right. So hit us up in the comments what you thought of this little presentation, what your thoughts are about Charles and William and their potential reigns to come, what you think is going to happen to the royal family now that Queen Elizabeth is gone. Are they going to continue? Are they going to end? You know, drop us some comments. Let us know what you think, and also let us know what you want us to talk about next. We have some things planned, but you know, we're open to suggestions. And yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. Definitely give us a like and a subscribe and share this around, and we hope to see you soon.